Good morning, everyone. Take a deep breath, sit back, and let me ask you something before we even begin. How many of you have been told by well-meaning friends, family members, or even some doctors that eggs are dangerous for you if you have diabetes? How many of you have stood in front of your refrigerator, staring at a carton of eggs, wondering if today is the day your blood sugar spikes because of that one boiled egg you're craving? If your hand just went up in your mind, then friend, you are exactly who I am speaking to today. Because what I am about to share with you over the next few minutes is going to change the way you look at eggs forever. Not as an enemy, but as one of the most powerful, most underestimated allies you have in your fight to control your blood sugar. I've spent years in clinics, sitting across from patients just like you, people newly diagnosed with diabetes, terrified of every single bite they take. People who have lived with diabetes for a decade and still don't fully understand what's happening inside their bodies when they eat. And time again, one question comes up more than almost any other. Doctor, can I eat eggs? And my answer today, as it has been for years, is a resounding yes. But, and this is the most important word in this entire speech, but you must know how to eat them correctly. Because there is a right way and a wrong way, and the difference between the two can mean the difference between stable, steady blood sugar and a roller coaster of spikes and crashes that leave you exhausted, foggy, and frustrated. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about why eggs have gotten such an unfair reputation in the first place. For decades, eggs were vilified because of their cholesterol content. A single large egg contains around 186 milligrams of cholesterol, almost entirely in the yolk. And for a long time, the medical community believed that eating cholesterol directly raised blood cholesterol levels, which in turn raised the risk of heart disease, a risk that is already elevated in people with diabetes. So the advice was simple, blunt, and honestly, oversimplified: avoid eggs, or at the very least, avoid the yolks. But here's what decades of newer research have shown us, and this is something I want every single one of you to understand deeply: dietary cholesterol, the cholesterol you eat, has a much smaller impact on blood cholesterol than we once believed. For most people, including most people with diabetes, the liver adjusts its own cholesterol production based on what you eat. Eat more dietary cholesterol, and your liver often produces less on its own. It's a beautifully designed feedback system that our bodies have relied on for as long as humans have existed. The bigger drivers of unhealthy cholesterol levels and cardiovascular risk are things like trans fats, excessive saturated fat, refined carbohydrates, and chronic high blood sugar itself. Not a single egg yolk at breakfast. Now, does this mean eggs are a magic food with zero considerations for a diabetic? Absolutely not. And that's exactly why we're here today, to talk about nuance, about strategy, about the correct way to include eggs in your diet so that they work for you, not against you. Let's talk first about what makes eggs genuinely remarkable from a blood sugar perspective. Eggs have what we call a glycemic index of essentially 0. Why? Because they contain almost no carbohydrates. A large egg has less than 1 gram of carbohydrate. Compare that to a slice of white bread with over 20 grams, or a bowl of cereal with 30 or 40 grams. When you eat something with virtually no carbohydrates, it does not directly spike your blood glucose the way carbohydrate-rich foods do. This is huge for those of you managing diabetes, because your primary goal, every single day, meal after meal, is to prevent those sharp spikes and the exhausting crashes that follow. But eggs do more than just sit quietly in the background, not causing harm. They actively help. Eggs are one of the most complete protein sources on this planet. They contain all 9 essential amino acids in near-perfect ratios for human use. Protein slows gastric emptying, meaning food stays in your stomach longer, which means glucose from any other carbohydrates you eat alongside your eggs gets released into your bloodstream more slowly and steadily. This is a concept I want you to hold on to tightly. Pairing protein with carbohydrates blunts the blood sugar spike from those carbohydrates. This is not just theory. This is something you can test yourself with a glucose meter or a continuous glucose monitor. Eat a piece of toast alone and watch your blood sugar. Then, on another day, eat that same piece of toast with 2 eggs and watch again. Most of my patients are stunned by the difference. The curve is flatter. The peak is lower. The crash afterward is gentler. This is the first correct way to eat eggs if you have diabetes. Never eat them in isolation as your only strategy, but use them as a tool to stabilize the rest of your meal. Eggs paired with whole grain toast instead of white bread. Eggs paired with a side of vegetables instead of hash browns. Eggs paired with avocado instead of sugary fruit juice. The egg becomes the anchor, the stabilizing force, around which the rest of your plate is built. Now let's talk about portion size because this matters more than people realize. 1 egg, 2 eggs, 3 eggs. Does it matter? For most adults with diabetes who do not have additional complications like kidney disease, 2 to 3 eggs a day, most days of the week, is considered safe and even beneficial by a growing body of research, including large studies that have found no significant increase in cardiovascular risk or mortality among people with type 2 diabetes who consume eggs regularly, when the rest of the diet is reasonably balanced. However, and I want to stress this, if you have coexisting kidney disease, a common complication in long-standing diabetes, protein intake needs to be more carefully managed under your doctor's or dietitian's guidance, because the kidneys have to work harder to process protein byproducts. So this is not a blanket permission slip for everyone. It is a general guideline that must be personalized to your specific health situation. Please, always discuss your individual case with your treating physician. Let's move now to something that I consider one of the most important, yet most overlooked aspects of eating eggs correctly if you have diabetes. The method of preparation. This is where so many people unknowingly sabotage themselves. You see, an egg by itself, boiled or poached, is a nearly perfect low glycemic food. But the moment we start cooking eggs the way many of us grew up eating them, fried in generous amounts of butter or oil, scrambled with cheese and cream, served alongside buttered toast, hash browns, sausages, and bacon, we transform a blood sugar-friendly food into a calorie-dense, saturated fat, heavy meal that can worsen insulin resistance over time, even if it doesn't spike your blood sugar in that single sitting. Insulin resistance is the slow, silent process happening in the background of type 2 diabetes, and a diet consistently high in saturated fat can make your cells less responsive to insulin, meaning your body needs to produce more and more insulin to do the same job, and eventually, your blood sugar control worsens. So what is the correct way to prepare your eggs? Boiling is one of the best methods. Hard-boiled or soft-boiled, with no added fat whatsoever. Poaching is another excellent method, again with zero added fat, just eggs cooked gently in water. If you enjoy scrambled eggs, cook them in a small amount of healthy oil like olive oil, or even better, in a non-stick pan with just a light spray of oil, rather than a generous pat of butter. If you love fried eggs, consider using an air fryer or a well-seasoned non-stick pan that requires minimal oil, rather than the traditional deep, buttery fry. Baking eggs, as in a vegetable frittata, using mostly egg whites with a couple of whole eggs for richness, is another wonderful low-fat, high-protein option that also lets you sneak in a serving or two of vegetables, giving you fiber, which further slows carbohydrate digestion if there are any carbs in your meal. I want to pause here and talk directly about the whole egg versus egg white debate, because I get asked this constantly. The yolk is where the cholesterol lives, yes, but it's also where the majority of the nutrition lives. The yolk contains vitamin D, vitamin B12, choline, which is critical for brain and liver health, as well as lutein and zeaxanthin, powerful antioxidants that protect your eyes, something particularly important for people with diabetes, who are already at higher risk of diabetic eye complications like retinopathy. So while egg whites are a fantastic pure protein source with zero fat and zero cholesterol, completely removing the yolk from your diet means throwing away a huge portion of the nutritional value that eggs offer. My advice, and the advice I give my own patients, is this: if you're a healthy adult with diabetes and no other complicating conditions, eat the whole egg. If your doctor has specifically told you to limit cholesterol intake due to a personal or family history of very high LDL cholesterol or heart disease, then a reasonable compromise is 1 whole egg plus 1 or 2 additional egg whites, giving you the benefits of the yolk's nutrients while moderating overall cholesterol intake. This way, you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now let's talk about timing, because when you eat your eggs matters almost as much as how you eat them. Breakfast is, for most people with diabetes, the meal where blood sugar control is trickiest. This is because of something called the dawn phenomenon, a natural surge of hormones like cortisol and growth hormone in the early morning hours that signals your liver to release stored glucose into your bloodstream, preparing your body for the day ahead. If you have diabetes, this natural surge can push your fasting blood sugar higher than you'd expect. And then if you follow it with a high carbohydrate breakfast like cereal, pancakes, or fruit juice, you compound the problem, sending your blood sugar soaring. This is exactly why an egg-based breakfast is one of the smartest choices you can make. Starting your day with protein and virtually zero carbohydrates gives your body a gentle, stable start rather than an assault of glucose right when your system is already primed to release more sugar into your blood. I often tell my patients, think of your breakfast as setting the tone for your entire day's blood sugar pattern. A high-carb breakfast tends to lead to what we call postprandial glucose swings that persist into the next meal, something researchers call the second meal effect, where a poor first meal actually worsens your blood sugar response to your second meal, even if that second meal is perfectly healthy. But a protein-rich, low-carb breakfast, like eggs, tends to improve your blood sugar response for the rest of the day. This single change, swapping a carb-heavy breakfast for an egg-based one, is one of the most powerful and simple changes you can make starting tomorrow morning. Let's talk now about combining eggs with other foods in a way that maximizes their benefit. A well-constructed diabetic-friendly plate built around eggs might look like this: 2 eggs prepared with minimal oil, a generous side of non-starchy vegetables like spinach, tomatoes, peppers, or mushrooms sauteed alongside, perhaps a small serving of avocado for healthy fats, and if you want a starch, a small portion of whole grain toast or a slice of sprouted grain bread rather than white bread or a bagel. This combination gives you protein, fiber, healthy fat, and a controlled, modest amount of complex carbohydrate. A combination that digests slowly, releases glucose steadily, and keeps you feeling full for hours, which itself helps prevent the blood sugar roller coaster that comes from snacking on quick sugary foods when hunger strikes too soon after a poorly balanced meal. I also want to address something many of my patients ask about: eggs as a snack. If you find your blood sugar dropping in the late afternoon, or if you're hungry between meals, a hard-boiled egg is one of the best snacks you can reach for. It requires no preparation in the moment. If you boil a batch at the start of the week, it has virtually no carbohydrate to spike your blood sugar, and the protein keeps you satisfied far longer than something like crackers or fruit alone would. I often recommend my patients keep a small container of hard-boiled eggs in the refrigerator at all times, specifically for this purpose. It removes the temptation to reach for less ideal options when hunger or a mild blood sugar dip strikes. Now, let's talk about a topic that doesn't get discussed enough: individual variability. Not everyone's body responds to food in exactly the same way, and this is especially true in diabetes. Some of you may notice that even eggs, prepared perfectly, seem to raise your blood sugar slightly. This can happen for a few reasons. First, if you're eating a large amount of protein and fat in one sitting, your liver can convert some of that excess protein into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, though this effect is generally modest and slow, unfolding over hours rather than the sharp spike you'd see from carbohydrates. Second, if your eggs are part of a larger meal that includes hidden carbohydrates, a side of hash browns, a sugary ketchup, a large glass of orange juice, the impact you're attributing to the eggs may actually be coming from those other components. This is exactly why I always encourage my patients who use a glucose meter or continuous glucose monitor to test their individual responses. Eat your eggs prepared a certain way, note your blood sugar before eating, and then again 1 and 2 hours afterward, and build your own personal data set. Diabetes management is not one size fits all, and learning your own body's unique responses is one of the most empowering things you can do for yourself. Let's also talk about what to avoid, because knowing the pitfalls is just as important as knowing the benefits. Avoid pairing your eggs with heavily processed breakfast meats like sausage links and bacon on a regular basis. These are high in saturated fat and sodium, and frequent consumption is linked to worsened insulin resistance and increased cardiovascular risk over time, a risk that is already elevated in diabetes. Avoid drowning your eggs in cheese sauces, heavy cream, or excessive butter, which turns a lean, protein-rich food into a calorie-dense one that can contribute to weight gain, particularly around the abdomen, is one of the strongest drivers of worsening insulin resistance. Avoid pairing your eggs with sugary condiments like ketchup, which is often loaded with added sugar despite seeming like a savory food. A few tablespoons can contain several grams of hidden sugar. And avoid the trap of thinking that, because eggs themselves are low carb, you can pair them with unlimited amounts of high carb sides like hash browns, pancakes, or sugary pastries and still expect good blood sugar control. The egg does not cancel out the carbohydrate load of everything else on your plate. It only helps moderate it when the rest of the meal is already reasonably balanced. I want to spend a moment talking about eggs in the context of weight management, because for so many people with type 2 diabetes, especially in the earlier years after diagnosis, achieving even a modest weight loss of 5 to 10% of body weight can dramatically improve insulin sensitivity and blood sugar control, sometimes even leading to remission of type 2 diabetes in certain cases. Eggs are a fantastic tool for this goal because they are what we call highly satiating, meaning they keep you feeling full for a long time relative to their calorie content. Studies have shown that people who eat eggs for breakfast tend to consume fewer total calories throughout the rest of the day compared to those who eat a carbohydrate-heavy breakfast of equal calories, like a bagel. This satiety effect comes from the protein content combined with the fat in the yolk, both of which slow digestion and trigger hormones in your gut that signal fullness to your brain. If weight management is part of your diabetes strategy, and for most people with type 2 diabetes, it absolutely should be a consideration, building your breakfast around eggs rather than cereal, toast, or pastries is one of the simplest, most sustainable changes you can make. Let's also touch on eggs for those of you managing type 1 diabetes, because the considerations are slightly different than for type 2. If you're on insulin and counting carbohydrates to determine your mealtime insulin dose, you already know that eggs require essentially no insulin coverage on their own because of their negligible carbohydrate content. This makes eggs a wonderfully flexible food for type 1 diabetics. You can enjoy a generous egg-based meal without the same anxiety about calculating a large insulin bolus that you might feel with a carbohydrate-heavy meal. However, remember what I mentioned earlier about protein and fat's slower, delayed effect on blood glucose through gluconeogenesis and delayed gastric emptying. If you eat a very large, very fatty egg-based meal, like a 3-egg cheese omelette with a side of sausage, you may see a delayed, gradual rise in blood sugar several hours later that your fast-acting insulin, dosed only at the start of the meal, doesn't fully cover. Many of my type 1 patients who use insulin pumps address this with what's called an extended or dual-wave bolus, spreading the insulin dose over a couple of hours rather than delivering it all at once. If this applies to you, this is a conversation to have directly with your endocrinologist or diabetes educator, because insulin dosing strategies must always be personalized and supervised. Let's talk now about a concern I hear constantly in my clinic. Doctor, I heard eggs increase the risk of heart disease in diabetics specifically, even if they don't in the general population. Is that true? This is a nuanced and important question, and I want to give you an honest, balanced answer rather than a falsely reassuring one. Some earlier observational studies did suggest a stronger association between egg consumption and cardiovascular events, specifically in people with diabetes, compared to the general population. However, when researchers dug deeper into these studies, much of this association appeared to be linked not to the eggs themselves, but to the broader dietary and lifestyle patterns of the people studied, many of whom were eating eggs as part of diets that were also high in processed meat, refined carbohydrates, and low in vegetables and fiber. More recent, better, controlled research has generally found that moderate egg consumption, in the context of an overall balanced, nutrient-dense diet, does not significantly increase cardiovascular risk in people with diabetes. The key phrase there is, in the context of an overall balanced diet. This brings us right back to everything we've discussed today. It's not the egg in isolation that determines your outcome. It's the entire pattern of what and how you eat. I also want to address something practical for those of you worried about cost or access. Eggs remain one of the most affordable, accessible, high-quality protein sources available almost anywhere in the world. You don't need exotic superfoods or expensive supplements to manage your diabetes well. Sometimes the most powerful tools are sitting quietly in your refrigerator, available for just a few cents per serving, and that is exactly what makes eggs such a wonderful ally for people managing a chronic condition that requires consistent, sustainable, everyday choices rather than occasional expensive interventions. Let's bring together everything we've discussed into a clear, practical framework you can start using immediately, starting with your very next meal. First, choose your cooking method wisely. Boiled, poached, or lightly cooked with minimal healthy oil, rather than deep-fried in butter or paired with processed meats. Second, build your plate around the egg rather than treating it as an afterthought. Pair it generously with non-starchy vegetables, a moderate portion of healthy fat like avocado or a few nuts, and if you include a starch, make it a small portion of a whole grain option. Third, consider timing your eggs at breakfast specifically to take advantage of their stabilizing effect on the dawn phenomenon, and to set a positive tone for your blood sugar throughout the rest of the day. Fourth, use eggs strategically as a snack option when hunger strikes between meals, keeping a batch of hard, boiled eggs ready in your refrigerator at all times. Fifth, personalize your approach. Use a glucose meter or continuous glucose monitor to understand your own unique response to eggs prepared in different ways and adjust based on your own data rather than generic advice alone. And sixth, always keep the bigger picture in mind. Eggs are a wonderful tool, but they exist within the context of your overall diet, your activity level, your medications, and your individual health profile. So any significant changes should always be discussed with your treating physician or diabetes care team. I know that living with diabetes can sometimes feel like walking through a minefield of conflicting advice. One article tells you eggs are dangerous, another tells you they're a superfood, and you're left standing in the grocery store aisle more confused than when you started. My goal today was to cut through that confusion and give you something clear, something grounded in evidence, something you can actually use starting tomorrow morning. Eggs, when chosen and prepared thoughtfully, are not your enemy. They are a steady, reliable, affordable partner in your daily effort to keep your blood sugar stable, your energy consistent, and your long-term health protected. I want you to remember this feeling right now, this moment of clarity, the next time you stand in front of your refrigerator wondering what to eat. You don't need fear. You don't need to avoid entire food groups based on outdated myths. What you need is knowledge, strategy, and consistency. And today, I've handed you exactly that when it comes to eggs. Take this knowledge, apply it to your next meal, and watch, over the coming weeks, how your relationship with food and your control over your blood sugar begins to shift in a direction that feels less like restriction and more like empowerment. Managing diabetes is a marathon, not a sprint, and every single meal is an opportunity, not a test you can fail, but a chance to make one more small, positive choice that adds up over time into something powerful: stable energy, protected organs, a longer, healthier life with the people you love. Eggs are one small piece of that much larger puzzle, but as you've seen today, they are a piece worth understanding deeply, because getting this one food right can genuinely make a meaningful difference in your daily blood sugar control. Before I close, I want to genuinely thank you for spending this time with me today, for trusting me to walk you through this topic with honesty and depth rather than oversimplified sound bites. If this speech gave you even one new piece of insight, one new strategy you're excited to try tomorrow morning, then it has done exactly what I hoped it would do. Please, subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next piece of practical, evidence-based health guidance I share, because there is so much more we need to cover together on this journey. From managing carbohydrates at dinner, to understanding your medications more deeply, to building sustainable exercise habits that work with your life, not against it. And please, leave a comment below and tell me, what other foods do you feel confused or anxious about when it comes to your diabetes? I read every single comment, and your questions directly shape the topics I choose to cover next, because this channel exists for you, to give you clarity where there has only been confusion, and confidence where there has only been fear. Take care of yourselves, Be gentle with yourselves as you navigate this condition, and remember that every small, informed choice you make truly does add up. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you, and take care.